I know from personal experience it can be tough to transition from a student nurse to a professional nurse. I remember when I started my first job in the emergency room, and I sat there twiddling my thumbs because I still had not successfully gotten an IV in and I was about to hit the ground running. Little did I know that there was such a thing as nurse residencies. And that's why I'm excited to tell you about HCA Healthcare's nurse residency program. This program supports newly graduating nursing students at the early stages of their careers. HCA Healthcare's year-long nurse residency program helps first-year nurses transition from the classroom to working in the field with confidence. Plus, nursing residents get access to a range of opportunities to learn from specialists in various areas, such as ER, critical care ICU, and surgical services. And there's a variety of other great benefits. Learn more today at careers.hcahealthcare.com/residency. Again, that's careers.hcahealthcare.com/residency. HCA Healthcare is an equal opportunity employer.
Welcome to the Nurse Leader Network podcast with your host, Chris Racinos. Wherever you're going on your nurse leader journey, we're here to help you get there.
Hey, Renee, welcome to the Nurse Leader Network podcast. So glad to have you on the show today.
Hi, Christina. Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
So today we're going to just kind of dive into a little bit about what you do and, how your work really relates to how we engage our frontline nurses. And so, Renee, why don't we start with just you kind of sharing with the audience a little bit about what you do, your background?
Okay, absolutely. So my name is Renee Davis, and I've been a nurse for 17 years with a starting out specialty in adult med surg. So working in inpatient, home care, ambulatory, etc. But I did that stint for about 6 years. And then for the past 10 years and counting, I've been working in my absolute passion, which is in nursing education and professional development. And so I recently left my prior employer. I was a corporate nursing professional development educator for one of the larger health systems in the Northeast. And I left that to start my own entrepreneurial venture in nurse education consulting. And so what I do is that I consult with nursing education entities, whether that be in academia, as I also teach. I'm also faculty in academia for a public university out here, as well as a private university out here in New York. So I consult with academic institutions as well as hospital organizations and their professional development entities on how educators, again, both in academia and in professional development, can improve or enhance their nurse learner engagement with the increased integration, I should say, of educational technology and design thinking, outcome design thinking, and just making their education pop a little bit more, just to sum it all up, so that our nurse learners are more engaged and they are bringing that content to the bedside or to the patient, wherever they might be encountering their patients, and having just better patient satisfaction overall with a more engaged learner.
Awesome. So for those listeners, this show has folks that are just entering into nursing leadership or want to enter into nursing leadership, and then we have really seasoned folks. So for those that may be curious, could you talk a little bit about what you think the return on investment is in terms of nurse engagement? Why do we want our nurses to be engaged? Why isn't it okay to just kind of have a module or, our typical way of education?
Absolutely. Well, as educators, like I said, I've been in education for 10 years and counting, and I absolutely love it. However, ever since I started in this specialty, I've seen that, educators, as nurses, we're inherently creative, right? We just know we're just the kings and queens of workarounds, right? But I've seen nurse educators spending an enormous amount of time creating these modules with, 100 plus slides on it with, each slide has like one chapter of a novel on there, or, and spending so much time, creating this amazing content, right? But then you have learners that are changing. And I'm seeing it. I was seeing it more and more as I had, so in my prior role, we had to conduct kind of like a centralized orientation for those that were being hired, nurses and other clinicians, as well as nursing support staff that were being hired into the health system. And I was seeing more and more that our audience was changing. And not even just from a generational thing, because this type of situation, learner engagement, transcends the generation situation. As I'm sure you see the generation mix that's happening, in the hospital setting as well as in other areas in nursing. And so I was seeing this and realizing that we can't keep doing the same things that we've been doing in education year after year after year. And the very common, quote, well, this is how we've been doing it for years, and does it necessarily mean that it's been working? Not necessarily. And so, the return on investment would be decreasing all that time that we are spending creating all these, we're trying to move away from lecture. However, there's a lot of educators that are still on the lecture bandwagon, which there are some positive aspects to lecture in terms of content delivery. But again, are we engaging our learner in terms of, are we using what they're using out there? Are we accessing their learning the way that they are accessing everything in their personal life? Now, are we using mobile learning? Are we using, gamification? Are we using more elements in educational technology, things that will wake them up, literally and figuratively, in our classroom settings, so that they're engaged, and therefore they can take that information that they now own, making it more learner centric, where they're owning that information, flipping the classrooms, requiring them to own that information. So now they really have a responsibility and accountability for their education, and they can take that to the patient. Versus what's happening now, where they're either falling asleep on us, or they're unable to do simple return demonstrations on competencies that they should have potentially learned, so to speak, after reading some of our lengthy modules or listening to our hour-long lectures.
Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. Tell me a little bit about some of the changes that you're seeing in our learners from prior time to now.
Well, I mean, like I mentioned, lecture, I read in an article, I read articles, on education and learner engagement every day. So the author escapes me now, but to quote, where oftentimes in a lecture format in the past, lecture was the thing, right? Because you can reach a mass amount of folks in one shot in terms of what you're trying to do, and so what you're trying to teach. And that's kind of it's been called in one aspect a quote unquote spray and pray method, right? Where you spray these copious amounts of education and you pray that your learners are going to actually retain it, right? So, what are some newer things? Again, mobile learning, right? Our 99.9% of our nurse learners, and when I use the term nurse learners, it's kind of an umbrella term as far as nursing students or professional nurses, that are already in practice. What are our nurse learners coming to our classrooms with now? Whether it be professional development classrooms, our unit-based learning, our just-in-time training, or whatever, they're coming with some sort of mobile device, right? And so as opposed to taking all that time to say, put away your devices, what I end up doing is flipping the script on them. And I say, take out your devices, take them out. We're going to use them for a purpose. Okay, you're going to text me your answer. You're going to take part in this quizzing game. You're going to take part in this other, online platform where you can use your phone, right? So that's one of the ways one of the newer things that we're seeing. And it's really not that new, to be quite honest. I tend to look outside of nursing a lot to see what other corporate industries are using for their learning and development and their corporate training. And we can definitely adapt and use what they're doing. And so I read a lot of other content totally outside of nursing, totally outside of healthcare, period, and to see what other folks are using. So mobile learning has been going for quite a while. Gamification has been going for quite a while, where we can just kind of throw a game in the middle of a lecture. We can keep our lecture, sure, but then throw some content, throw some other elements in there that integrates technology in a purposeful way, not just saying, okay, well, it's in the literature that I have to throw in some technology, so I'm going to throw something in here. No, actually use it in a purposeful way and get our learners involved and engaged. Social media, 99.9% of our nurse learners are on some sort of social media platform, right? How can we use that in our learning and development? How perhaps creating Facebook groups, particularly for that class that you have. I mean, this is being done in high school settings where the teachers are asking students to create a Facebook page or group just for that classroom, right? So it's away from their personal page, and they have a page just for their classroom where they can have online discussions about the content that was being taught for that day, and come back the next day with information and answers to the content that was spoken to. Twitter groups. If you want to go as far as Instagram, where you're using more photos and things like that to capture your nurse learners. LinkedIn, right? Using LinkedIn as a platform. So social media absolutely is changing how we're teaching and learning right now. Podcasting, what we're doing right now, can we use that in some sort of way for nursing education in academia and professional development? Nurses are on the run. We are considered quote unquote deskless workers. We don't sit. And so we can't necessarily sit and watch modules or sit and listen to a lecture. We need to be on the go. And how can we do that? How can we provide education that can be accessed anywhere and any time for our learners? So those are just some of the things that I'm noticing that's changing in nursing education.
You talked about flipped classroom. Could you tell me a little bit more about what that is and how you might implement it?
So a flipped classroom, so we have our nurse learners in the room, and let's say we're about to talk about cultural awareness or cultural sensitivity, perhaps. I'm just throwing out a topic here. And we give just the very basic points, very high level overview. And we have or perhaps we're ending a lesson and we're telling our nurse learners, okay, tomorrow we're going to be talking about cultural awareness or cultural sensitivity, cultural competency. And we provide some high level bullets about the content that we're going to be talking about. Now they are required to go on their own and research whatever topics that you've put out there, you as the educator have put out there for them. And they are expected to come back to the class the next day or later on in the day, however your classes are situated, with that information to be able to talk about it as a group, if you have a large group, if you split them into smaller groups and have them talk about the content and tell you what they've learned about that content with whatever specific bullets that you had out there, to give them a start. You give them a starting point, and then they take it and run with it. And what that does is it causes the learner to own that information so that they're not relying on you. It's not instructor centered. It's not instructor focused anymore. It's not a passive way of learning. They're not relying on you to provide them with the information. They are the ones that's getting the education on their own, and they're giving it to you. And obviously you're there to facilitate the sessions, make sure that everybody's still staying on target, still staying on focus. And then you're providing your expertise on the topic in addition to whatever they're bringing you. So it's a great way to allow the learner to have that responsibility and accountability on the content. And that way they retain it a lot better than having that information being spoken to them and brought to them. They can bring that to you. And of course, you as the expert, you're the educator, you're there to provide the areas where they might have missed or fill in any gaps where they might have not found the information. So again, it's another quote that is very often used in education, moving away from that sage on the stage, quote unquote, to that guide on the side.
I love that.
It's been around for a while. It's a quote been around for a while, but I love it absolutely all the time.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds, the different techniques that you're talking about, the different ways to kind of engage. And I mean, it sounds really great, but let's get practical here. Could you tell me about a time that you maybe implemented this in an orientation or an onboarding? And so, I have folks that come through my door every 2 weeks. We have brand new nurses coming in, and sometimes they're students and sometimes they're my employees. And so I'm really interested in how I can get them engaged when we onboard them from the start. So tell me about a time that you've done that and kind of what it looked like.
Absolutely. So you're absolutely right in terms of getting practical and getting realistic, right? Because one of the biggest constraints that I've found in my own kind of unofficial research, so to speak, but meaning like surveys and things that I've done post any of my learner engagement, courses and continuing education classes, one of the biggest constraints for nurse educators is time, right? Where do we have the time to implement these things? But again, all that time that's being taken to create those modules that are like 50 slides and 100 slides, and this is slides with like all content. I'm not even talking about slide decks that have maybe a few pictures or whatever, so that makes up the slide. No, I mean just every slide is copious amounts of content. Look at the time that's being taken to create that versus the time where you can just take a few moments. A lot of these platforms are very, very user-friendly. They have a lot of white space on the screen, so you can kind of easily go through, and they offer tutorials. A lot of them are free. A lot of these educational technology platforms, for example. And so the time it takes for you to create those huge slide decks, etc., can be used to learn a new platform that you can integrate in your classroom. So for example, like I said in my prior role, and I worked with a team of amazing educators who I still keep in touch with to this day. They're awesome folks. And our senior leadership was amazing in that they allowed us to try different things as long as it was, within budget. As we know, that's always a concern, but within budget, that we can try these resources and that it's going to work for our learners where they're going to be more engaged. And so that was great. You have to have that buy-in from your senior leadership first and foremost. And so we had that from them. And so we decided with our orientation, we were entertaining anywhere from 50 to 100 orientees. This is professionals, clinicians, every other week. And those other weeks that we had orientation were with nursing support staff. So certified nurses aides, patient care associates, PCAs, CNAs, etc. And we tried these same variations with content delivery with them also, with that population also. But we first tried it with our professional group. And so we're entertaining those numbers on a weekly basis. Or even in academia, I had to teach a transition to nursing professional practice course. This was their senior capstone course. I had to teach that class on a Friday in the spring semester, for 6 hours, by the way. So that was another thing where I'm like, OMG, what am I going to do with these students, for 6 hours? Okay, 5.5, you give them a half-hour break for lunch or whatever. What am I supposed to do with them? I can't even stand to hear myself talk for 5.5 hours, much less them, right? Those were two distinct situations that I can tell you what we did. So in the orientation aspect, so professional development aspect, we started using platforms like Kahoot. Okay. And I may mention some platforms here with you. I don't work for them. Just so you know, there's no conflict of interest. I don't work for these folks. I'm an independent contractor. I'm just talking about the platforms that I've used that have been successful for me. So gaming platforms such as Kahoot or something like Socrative, which is another quizzing platform, where we basically would have our lectures, let's say, and on average, the lectures were about 30 to 60 minutes, depending on what the content was. And there was lecture, there was skills demonstration, there was group work, right? We tried to mix it up here and there, but still we needed to get them, when we had the lecture content, we still had to have them a little bit more engaged. And so we would throw in this game where we're asking them, okay, take out your devices. We just talked about XYZ, whatever we might have talked about. Let's answer some questions now related to what we just talked about. And it instantly woke them up. It's like a knowledge check, right? Mm-hmm. And it instantly woke them up and it brought everybody back around. And then we were able to maybe get back into the lecture or start some group work or start some, skills demonstrations or what have you, and had the content work that way. If we had e-learning modules, again, I know that we're moving a lot towards e-learning modules, which is great. However, are we just having them read, and then have them take that inevitable post-test at the end where they end up skipping the content and trying to go to the post-test anyway? Or
I've never done that, by the way.
With it. Oh, of course not. None of us have, right? None of us have. But anyway, we never have done that. But anyway, how can we do something where we're doing little knowledge checks or waking them up when we're in e-learning? So we had e-learning situations within our professional development where we might have a little cartoon character kind of pop up and say, hey, here's some knowledge check questions that we have for you, and just kind of popping in some questions in between the content as opposed to at the end. That also, for the educators, is also a form of formative assessment, a formative evaluation where you can kind of see as you're going how the learner is doing and how the learner is engaging and interacting with your content. So within professional development, we've flexed it in those kind of ways where we've integrated the technology right into the lecture or right into the e-learning platform. For my capstone class situation, in addition to me finding guest speakers, because again, there was no way I was going to be a talking head for 5.5 hours. So I found guest speakers to work with me, to work with the class and to come and speak to them. But I also used polling, right? So for them, I used Poll Everywhere. And so these were students, and Poll Everywhere has been around, as I'm sure you know, for ages. It's been there for ages, and it's just another polling platform. It's basically, it takes away the use of, for those educators that teach in academia, many folks are still using technology where the students have to purchase clickers, right? So it's kind of like that audience response system where students have to purchase this. Students are broke. Okay, so why don't we use the phones that they're already paying for and have them answer some polling questions? So I used that in the classroom. This was we're in 2019. This is maybe 3 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. And so not that long ago. And the students were like blown away. And I'm sitting there like, why are you so blown away by this? Because it's not something, they were not engaged in this type of way in the learning environment. And so the students were completely blown away. Again, I was blown away that they were blown away because I'm like, why? This has been around forever. But they told me that their faculty, the majority of their faculty, and they're now in their senior year, so they're done with all their content. They're just kind of trudging through, counting down the days till graduation and finishing up their clinicals, that no one had ever tried to engage them using some element of technology outside of PowerPoint slides. And so those were two specific instances where we found the bang for our buck. And our buck was not necessarily monetary wise, but just like taking a few moments to learn some of these different platforms and seeing how they can be used in learning within academia and professional development.
That sounds awesome. I know my team, they have you ever been to an escape room?
Yes, I love escape rooms.
Okay. Oh my gosh, I love them unless I get scared. But so my team created an escape room for sepsis. And so the gist of it was through teamwork, they had to save the patient from sepsis. We put teams of nurses and physicians as interdisciplinary through the escape room, and that was their competency. And, I had one of the nurses come back to us and tell us, I haven't seen sepsis in a really long time. And the other day I was able to recognize it in a patient, and we got that patient the care they needed really timely because it stuck with her. And so it was really kind of impactful in terms of the ways that we educate our folks.
Absolutely.
That being said, if there's listeners on the show that I'm sure are really interested in this and would love to take it to their medical centers and their educational settings, tell me, if I was interested in this and I hadn't heard of how to do this, what would be first or second step? How would we begin to improve learner engagement from where we sit?
Take stock of, as educators, again, might be your listeners, that are going to be your listeners, not might be, but will be your listeners, as they are nurse leaders. Take stock of your learners, right? Do what and now keeping in mind that I completed a master's program as a clinical nurse specialist, not in a nursing education master's graduate degree. However, I learned on the go. In my prior role, I was there for 8.5 years. And so I learned on the go all of those elements that completed their graduate degree in nursing education, those that they learned that. And one of the things that we learn is we first assess, right? Nursing process, learner needs assessment, right? Take stock of your learners in the room. Take a look at not just generation, but that's one of them. Because also, like I think I mentioned earlier in our broadcast, in that using innovative trends in learner engagement transcends generation. So we're seeing an unprecedented around 4 generations working in the same, sometimes on the same unit, definitely in the same hospital, from baby boomer down to our Generation Z folks that's coming in. And so how can we use that to pivot how we deliver our content? How can we, and it doesn't all have to be technology based, right? Just something a little bit more innovative, just like your escape room. It's not technology based, right? But it was just something innovative, and innovative doesn't necessarily have to be tech based. It's just thinking differently. Like our good friend Steve Jobs always said, just think differently. And so how can we use the more seasoned nurses that laid the foundation and have paved a lot of the way in nursing? How can we use them to help our Gen Zers, perhaps, and this is just an example, with communication? Because we find when we do the research and we do the reading on our generations, Generation Z, again, this is not a knock against them, our newer, younger generation, communication is somewhat of a problem for them. Why? Because they are communicating online. They're communicating in social media. And so they don't really know how to communicate effectively, right? They know how to talk, but we see it every day in our regular interactions, right? When I go to the stores, and I'm not that far away from Gen Z, so I'm not trying to put bigger, higher age on myself. But I see it every day where I go to the stores and I'm interfacing with a younger person who might be, a cashier or what have you, and they're not looking at me, or they're on their phone. They are experts at multitasking. They are on their phones while they're ringing up my order, while they're speaking to another coworker. It's absolutely mind-boggling, but it's amazing to watch, right? So how can we engage our generations? So just an example in terms of taking stock of our learners, right? And doing our needs assessment so that we can see what are some ways, because technology may not be necessarily the way. It might be something like what you guys implemented, the escape room, or doing something like I know another hospital that's out here on the East Coast that's their directors of education or of nursing education are near and dear friends of mine. They did something like a crime scene, like a CSI type of thing, and it sounds gory. It was not, but it was not. But it just another aspect, of how we can look at our learners and just take stock of where they are in their learning journeys, and then go from there, and how we can change our delivery of our content.
Awesome. So, with all this to say, where do you think nursing education is going to be in the next decade, and are we ready for that change?
So I think we're moving in a direction where, even though I said it's not all about technology, it's all about technology. So I'm contradicting myself already. But in terms of, again, just there's so many different ways that folks are obtaining, processing, learning information. That's why I said that this kind of conversation, learner engagement, transcends the generation situation. Any learner that walks through your door, whatever generation that they are identify with, they are getting their information in so many different ways. It's absolutely overwhelming, the amount of ways to get information: podcasting, obviously online, social media, etc. How can we capture that? Right? How can we capture that in the new decade that's upon us? How can we be ready for it? Engage in our own professional development. Seek out our own professional development. The time to sharpen our saw. Stephen Covey, that author of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. How can we sharpen our own saw as educators to keep up to date and be current with what's happening in education and education trends? Looking outside of nursing, seeing what other industries are doing to engage their learners. And there is going to be aspects of technology, learning, using technology, mobile learning. That's where we are. Our learners need to be able to access their content anywhere, and they need to be sitting in a local coffee shop and being able to access their learning anywhere, anytime. And unfortunately, a lot of us are bound by these learning management systems, which, again, I'm not knocking any learning management systems, because they are good for what they do in terms of tracking and reporting, right? And a lot of educators, that's our bread and butter. We need to have the outcomes and reports to show that our learners completed their education or whatever. But it's not just about completing it. Are they completing the education, but are they taking it with them to their patients, right? Are we seeing that knowledge transfer? Especially with our new nurse grads, where there's still a gap in knowledge, right? From what they learned in school to what they're seeing in the clinical area with the patients. There's still a little bit of a gap, because, again, that also ties to, in academia, in a lot of cases, there are curriculums that are still focusing on the hospital patient. And so, but we have so many different patients now. Healthcare is moving back into the community. So are we talking about the patient that's in their home, or the patient that goes to a dialysis center 3 times a week, or the patient that's in the nursing homes, et cetera? Really looking at where healthcare is going in the next decade and beyond, where our nurse learners are coming from in the next decade and beyond, and seeking out our own professional development. So we as educators, we take so much time in sharpening the saws of our learners. A lot of times, except for conferences, we attend conferences, etc. Again, but these conferences, they give us so much information, but I think it's an area of continuous professional development on our part, our meaning the nurse educator's part, to see what is out there. And again, not just seeking out those CEUs, but looking for professional development in other areas outside of nursing that can help us along the way.
Great. I think everything that you said is just so true, especially just looking outside of nursing and taking accountability for our own development in terms of what it is we're trying to get to see. I resonate so much with that. So, Renee, you mentioned a bunch of different platforms, Kahoot, Socrates, Poll Everywhere. For the audience, I'll be linking all of those software sites to the show notes. If the audience would like to learn more about you, Renee, or what you do, where can they find you?
So I am on LinkedIn under Renee Davis. You can find me there. I'm also on Twitter, the handle of @ProDevo. So that's PROD as in David, EVO, ProDevo. The name of my company, ProDevo Design and Consulting. And then also on my website, prodevogroup.com.
Awesome. Thanks for an awesome show, Renee. I'm so glad that we were able to get you on the show, and I'm so thankful that we were able to have you and share kind of all this wisdom around nursing professional development. It was amazing.
Thank you so much. I'm always happy. As you can tell, I talk way too much. I love to share, knowledge and just my passion. My mission is to just make sure that nurse educators are, sharpening their saw, like I mentioned, and just educating themselves and seeking their own professional development on ways that they can increase learner engagement, and that they can just arming educators with that knowledge, mindset, confidence, and tech tools to be able to make more memorable, meaningful, educational experiences, and make it memorable and meaningful for everyone involved, for the educator as well, so that they're not, sitting there pulling hairs out trying to, figure out what slide that they're up to next, or what have you. So, how can we make this fun but memorable and meaningful for everyone involved?
Yeah.
That's been my mission. That's my passion within education, nursing education.
Yeah, it definitely shows. It really shows. Well, thanks again.
Thank you so much, Christina.